Michael Thompson wiped sweat from his brow as he maneuvered the last box into his brother Jason's new home. Jason, a wheelchair user since a classified operation gone wrong 3 years ago, wheeled himself around the spacious living room, checking sightlines to windows and exits, old habits from 20 years in intelligence work. The doorbell chimed and both brothers tensed instinctively. Standing on the porch was Elaine Barker, clipboard in hand and pearls gleaming against her pressed blouse. "Welcome to Oakwood Estates," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes as she surveyed the ramp Michael had installed. "I'm the HOA president." When Jason extended his hand, she hesitated before taking it, her gaze lingering on the specialized tablet peeking from his satchel. As she left, citing 17 HOA regulations they needed to review immediately, Jason caught Michael's eye. "Did you notice how she positioned herself to see my security panel codes?" he whispered, "and how she was more interested in my office setup than anything else." Michael laughed it off, but Jason quietly activated a small device under his wheelchair that night, the same type of signal jammer he used in embassy security protocols overseas. Later that evening, as Michael helped unpack the kitchen, Jason maneuvered his wheelchair toward the back patio. "Something's not right about this place," he said quietly, motioning for Michael to join him outside. The sunset cast long shadows across the meticulously maintained lawns of Oakwood Estates. Jason pointed discreetly to a small garden statue in the neighbor's yard that seemed oddly positioned. "That's the third decorative item I've noticed that's angled toward my office window." Michael sighed. "You're being paranoid, Jay. This isn't Kabul or Tehran." "Paranoia kept me alive in those places," Jason replied, running his hand along the underside of the patio table, checking for devices. Finding nothing, he relaxed slightly. "You remember what happened to Marcus after you retired?" Michael nodded grimly. Their former colleague had been found dead in his home after what appeared to be a break-in gone wrong, but the intelligence community had quietly investigated it as a targeted hit. "I'm not taking chances," Jason continued, pulling out a small device from his pocket that resembled an ordinary smartphone. He tapped the screen, and it displayed a heat map of the surrounding area. 3 surveillance cameras on the perimeter of our property that aren't mine, and they're well hidden. As they moved back inside, a text message pinged on Jason's secure phone. It was from an unlisted number. "Bluebird Secure. Watching your 6. Someone from his old unit was keeping tabs on him. That night, after Michael had left, Jason rolled his wheelchair to each window, methodically installing microscopic sensors that would alert him to any perimeter breach. From a hidden compartment in his chair, he retrieved a small metal case containing specialized equipment that officially didn't exist. As he worked, he noticed Elaine Barker's silhouette through his front window, walking her small dog for the 3rd time that evening, each time pausing just long enough to glance at his house. When she took out her phone to apparently take a photo, Jason smiled grimly. The game was already beginning. 3 weeks later, Jason's phone buzzed with the 5th HOA violation notice that week. Outside his window, Elaine's gardener mysteriously needed to trim bushes near Jason's office daily, always when Jason was on his secure calls. When Jason ordered takeout, Elaine happened to be photographing landscaping violations as the delivery driver arrived. She even reported Jason's specialized medical transport as an unauthorized vehicle, resulting in it being temporarily towed. Jason's neighbors, the Rileys, slipped him a note during a power outage that affected only his home. "She did the same thing to the retired judge who lived here before you." He moved out after 2 months. That night, Jason wheeled himself to his reinforced closet and retrieved a small case. Inside was equipment he'd hoped to leave in his past: miniature cameras, signal detectors, and a secure satellite phone. As he set up subtle monitoring systems, he noticed something odd: directional signal interference targeting only his home office. Amateur technique, but concerning. Far away in Langley, an automated system registered the activation of Jason's equipment, flagging it for review by a small team that monitored former operatives in potential distress. The next morning, Jason maneuvered his wheelchair onto his back patio with a cup of coffee and what appeared to be a newspaper. In reality, the tablet hidden behind the paper was scanning for electromagnetic frequencies. His security systems had detected 3 attempted wireless intrusions overnight. As he pretended to enjoy the morning sun, his trained eyes spotted movement behind the curtains of Elaine's house across the street. His doorbell rang precisely at 9:00 a.m., Elaine, immaculately dressed in a beige pantsuit, holding another clipboard. "Mr. Thompson, your garden gnome violates HOA aesthetic guidelines. Section 4.12, she announced without preamble. "I don't have a garden gnome," Jason replied calmly. Elaine's smile tightened. "Well, someone placed one by your rose bushes last night. It needs to be removed immediately." Jason nodded pleasantly. "I'll take care of it." The gnome he knew hadn't been there at midnight when his motion sensors had done their hourly sweep. Someone had placed it there, likely containing surveillance equipment. Later that afternoon, the community's maintenance man, Eduardo, stopped by ostensibly to check Jason's irrigation system. "Miss Barker sends me to everyone new," he explained quietly, while genuinely examining the sprinklers. Then, bending down pretending to check a valve, he whispered, "Be careful, sir. She had cameras installed throughout the community last month, not just the entrance gates, everywhere." Jason slipped Eduardo a 20. "Any idea who monitors them?" "Company called Nexus Security. Same one that fired me from my last job when I asked too many questions," Eduardo replied, tucking the bill away. "They're not regular security guards." That evening, Jason called Michael using a burner phone from his collection. "I need you to run a background check on a company," he said without identifying himself, using their old code patterns. "And I need those special tools you borrowed last Christmas." The call lasted less than a minute, but it was enough. In his basement office at home, Michael began searching Nexus Security in classified databases his cybersecurity clearance still gave him access to. The results made him freeze. FLAGGD, potential shell company for known hostile intelligence gathering operation. Report any contact immediately. Meanwhile, Jason removed the garden gnome using a specialized bag that blocked signals. Inside his garage, he carefully disassembled it to reveal an advanced audio/video transmitter disguised as a decorative element. The craftsmanship was excellent, Russian-made but with Chinese components. This was no amateur HOA president's surveillance. This was professional espionage. Jason's VA appointment ran long after complications with his medication. Darkness had fallen by the time his medical transport dropped him at the community entrance, where his access code mysteriously failed. Forced to wheel himself along the perimeter to the resident gate in the cold rain, he discovered his accessibility keypad there had been deactivated too. His backup physical key worked, but at his house, an industrial padlock secured the wheelchair ramp, completely unauthorized and impossible to remove without tools. As rain soaked through his clothes, Jason's phone displayed "network unavailable, signal jamming again." Through his window, he could see Elaine watching from across the street, pretending to walk her dog. When elderly neighbors Mr. and Mrs. Chen approached to help, Elaine intercepted them, showing something on her phone that made them retreat with worried glances. With his service-connected circulation issues making the cold increasingly dangerous, Jason retrieved the satellite phone hidden in his wheelchair's compartment. No signal jammer could block that frequency. His call didn't go to Michael. It triggered an immediate alert at the Special Activities Monitoring Desk, where Jason's former teammate Donna Lewis was already investigating strange monitoring patterns around former intelligence personnel in suburban communities. The rain intensified, driven by gusting winds that sent icy needles against Jason's face. His fingers, already stiff from poor circulation, struggled to maintain their grip on his wheelchair rims. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and Jason knew the dangers all too well. His doctors had warned him repeatedly about exposure risks since his injury had compromised his body's ability to regulate temperature. Through the curtain of rain, Jason spotted movement at the Chen's house. Mrs. Chen appeared briefly in their window, her face etched with concern before Mr. Chen pulled her away. Moments later, their porch light went out, a clear sign they'd been warned off again. "Need some help there, brother." The voice came from behind, startling Jason. He turned to find a man in a FedEx uniform holding an umbrella package tucked under his arm. "Delivery this late?" Jason asked, cautiously assessing the man. The uniform looked authentic, but the stance was wrong, too balanced, too aware. The man stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Nightingale sends regards." It was an old recognition code from Jason's field days. Relief washed over Jason. "Who's running point?" "Lewis. She sent me ahead while they assemble." "You've kicked quite the hornet's nest." The operative glanced at the locked ramp. "That's a problem. We can't move too openly yet. The surveillance here is extensive, and we need to identify all players before showing our hand." Jason nodded. "There are at least 4 cameras with direct sight on my house. One in the lamppost, one in the Hendersons' birdhouse, another in the community signage, and the 4th in the storm drain. Yeah, we mapped them." The operative handed Jason the package. Medical supplies, supposedly. Actually contains a thermal blanket, temporary signal booster, and bypass tool for that lock. "We need 20 more minutes before extraction. Lewis wants to catch someone in the act." As the operative casually strolled away, whistling as though he'd simply delivered a package, Jason noticed Elaine emerging from her house again, now accompanied by a man he'd never seen before. The stranger wore the uniform of Nexus Security, but moved with military precision, hand resting casually near his waistband, armed almost certainly. Jason quietly opened the package, finding the promised thermal blanket, which he immediately wrapped around himself. The signal booster, disguised as a medical alert pendant, allowed him to briefly access a secure network and confirm what he suspected. The community's camera system had been compromised and redirected to an off-site server farm in Eastern Europe. As he worked the bypass tool into the padlock mechanism, Jason caught sight of a black SUV slowly circling the neighborhood for the third time. Through the rain-streaked window, he could make out multiple occupants, their faces obscured. Friend or foe, he couldn't tell. But the trap was closing, either around him or around the people who had targeted him. In the distance, lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the scene in stark relief. Elaine and her security companion watching from beneath an umbrella, the circling SUV pausing at the corner. And most surprisingly, the Chen's curtains parting slightly to reveal Mr. Chen speaking into what appeared to be a military-grade radio. Michael screeched into Oakwood Estates 2 hours later to find a grim scene. Jason still trapped outside, violently shivering, with neighbors watching anxiously from behind curtains. When Michael used bolt cutters on the unauthorized lock, Elaine emerged from the shadows with the HOA security chairman and 2 private security guards. "That's destruction of HOA property," she announced, filming with her phone. "And we have evidence your brother is running an illegal business." She produced photographs of Jason's medical equipment, misrepresenting them as surveillance devices. When the security guards moved to block Michael from helping Jason inside, a silver sedan with government plates silently pulled up. A woman in an immaculate suit approached, discreetly showing identification that made the security guards step back immediately. "Ms. Barker," she said calmly, "I'm Special Agent Lewis. We need to discuss your unauthorized surveillance equipment installation, which is interfering with a federal monitoring station." As paramedics attended to Jason, Michael noticed 3 more unmarked vehicles positioning themselves at community exits. Inside Jason's house, computers and equipment he'd never seen before blinked from behind false walls and cabinet panels. His brother's home was a sophisticated monitoring post, and someone had been working very hard to disable it. The rain had finally stopped, but biting wind whipped through the cul-de-sac, carrying voices across the tense standoff. Michael positioned himself protectively between Jason and the security guards, the bolt cutters still gripped tightly in his hand. "Stand down, sir," one of the guards ordered, hand hovering near his taser. "This is a private community matter." "Private community matters don't include endangering the life of a disabled veteran," Michael shot back, gesturing to Jason's blue-tinged lips and trembling form. "This is criminal negligence, possibly attempted manslaughter." Elaine laughed, the sound brittle in the night air. "Always so dramatic, these government types. Your brother refused to comply with community standards. Actions have consequences." Agent Lewis stepped forward, her movements measured and precise. "Ms. Barker, perhaps we should continue this conversation at your residence. My colleagues have some questions about the equipment installed in your attic." Elaine's composure cracked momentarily. "You have no right to enter my home without a warrant." "Actually," Lewis replied, producing a document from her jacket, "we do. Judge Hannity signed this 3 hours ago. Interesting coincidence, he used to live in this very community before being harassed into leaving. He was quite eager to assist our investigation." As if on cue, the front doors of 6 houses opened simultaneously, revealing individuals in tactical gear, moving with coordinated precision. The Nexus security guards exchanged nervous glances, their hands moving away from their weapons. Michael helped the paramedics move Jason onto a stretcher, noticing for the first time a small device attached to his brother's wheelchair, something that hadn't been there the last time he visited. "Thermal imaging countermeasures," Jason whispered, his voice weak but eyes alert. "They've been scanning the house every night for 2 weeks. I needed to make them think I had something to hide." Inside Jason's home, Michael followed Agent Lewis through rooms that seemed completely transformed. What had been a spare bedroom now contained a communications array hidden behind a bookshelf that swung outward. The bathroom medicine cabinet concealed a facial recognition system linked to the front door camera. "Your brother has been very busy," Lewis noted, watching technicians carefully document each piece of equipment. "This setup costs millions and isn't available to civilians." "He never mentioned any of this," Michael said, bewildered. The community center buzzed with frightened neighbors the next morning as federal agents methodically swept the building. Agent Lewis briefed Michael privately. Elaine was no ordinary HOA tyrant. She was a spotter for a foreign intelligence network targeting retired government personnel for recruitment or compromise. The HOA's unusually invasive surveillance system, which Elaine had installed under the guise of security upgrades, contained sophisticated equipment for intercepting communications. "Your brother wasn't her first target," Lewis explained, showing Michael photographs of 5 other wheelchair users in different communities, all with intelligence backgrounds, all driven out by Elaine's harassment. "The pattern is identical. Target mobility-impaired former operatives who might be bitter about their injuries or financial situations. The landscapers had been planting surveillance devices. The power outages were cover for installation attempts. And the lockout was no petty harassment. It was meant to force Jason to use unsecured channels to call for help, potentially revealing operational information." Meanwhile, in the hospital, Jason received an encrypted message on his secure tablet. "Songbird contained. Ness security." Phoenix protocol authorized. For the first time in months, he smiled. His suspicions had activated a counterintelligence operation he helped design before his injury. 3 days later, Michael sat beside Jason's hospital bed, watching his brother's color gradually return to normal. The hypothermia had been more severe than initially diagnosed, complicated by Jason's circulatory issues from his service injuries. "You could have died out there," Michael said quietly. "All for an operation you didn't tell me about." Jason's eyes opened slowly. "Compartmentalization. Standard protocol. I couldn't risk." "Save it," Michael interrupted. "Agent Lewis showed me everything." The Phoenix protocol. The 8 other disabled veterans targeted across 3 states. The data theft attempts. He leaned forward. "What I don't understand is why they wanted you so badly. What do you know that's worth all this?" Jason glanced at the door before pressing a hidden button on his hospital bed that emitted a soft whine, a signal jammer. "It wasn't what I know. It's what I designed." He reached for a water glass, his hand still trembling slightly. "Before my injury, I developed an AI system for identifying deep cover operatives, people who've been in place for decades, so integrated they don't trigger normal counterintelligence protocols. We called it HOA. Michael stared at his brother. "That's why they targeted people with mobility issues? Because you're all connected to this program?" "Not exactly," Jason replied. "The program was developed by a team that subsequently experienced an unusual number of accidents, car crashes, home invasions, unexpected health complications. 5 dead, 3 injured seriously enough to require mobility assistance, including me. Only I survived with my cognitive abilities fully intact. They want the access protocols in my head." A soft knock interrupted them. Mrs. Chen entered, no longer the frightened elderly neighbor, but moving with confident precision, nodding to Jason. "Director wants confirmation. Are the backup servers compromised?" Jason shook his head. "Clean. I checked them before the lockout. They never found the basement access." Michael looked between them in confusion. "Wait, you're not really neighbors." Mrs. Chen smiled thinly. "We're his protective detail. Have been for 6 months." She turned to Jason. "We've identified 37 members of their network so far, including 3 at the VA hospital who were tampering with your medication." Jason winced. "That explains the dizziness. I assume it was legitimate side effects." "The most concerning development," Mrs. Chen continued, "is Elaine Barker herself. She's not talking, and her biometrics don't match any known operative in our databases." "Ghost profile," Jason muttered. "High-level placement. She was probably running the entire Eastern Seaboard operation." Agent Lewis entered the room, tablet in hand. "We found something in her house you need to see." She displayed photographs of a hidden room beneath Elaine's garage, walls covered with surveillance images and data points about dozens of former intelligence personnel. This wasn't just about Harbe and GER. They were mapping our entire retired operative network, identifying vulnerabilities, creating pressure points. 6 weeks later, Michael visited Jason's home to find a transformed community. The new HOA board, thoroughly vetted by agencies Jason still refused to name, had implemented genuine accessibility features throughout the neighborhood. As they shared beers on the patio, 3 moving trucks worked down the street. "Former intelligence personnel," Jason explained quietly. "This community is becoming a protected retirement location for people like me." The brothers watched as a familiar silver sedan pulled up, and Agent Lewis, now introduced as Deputy Director Lewis, joined them with the folder. "Elaine Barker was operating in 6 states, she explained. Your lockout triggered the exposure of an entire network. The operation had been planned for months, but Jason's activation of emergency protocols had accelerated everything. Sometimes the best bait is the one that looks most vulnerable," Jason said with a wink. As the sun set, neighbors gathered for a community barbecue where for the first time everyone felt safe to share their backgrounds. The retired judge was former JG. The Chens had been NSA cryptographers, and the quiet woman who walked her cats had run human operations across 3 continents. For years, they'd all been isolated by Elaine's tactics, never realizing they were being systematically separated from potential allies. The wheelchair was actually perfect cover, Jason told Michael as they watched their new friends. Nobody expects the guy who can't climb stairs to be the one who brings down an intelligence operation. Michael laughed, finally understanding why his brother had insisted on this specific community, despite his warnings about the notorious HOA. So the CIA really was on the case all along. Jason's eyes twinkled as he tapped his secure tablet. "Let's just say I never fully retired, and neither did any of our neighbors." The barbecue was in full swing as the summer evening descended into dusk. String lights illuminated the community center's backyard, where dozens of residents, both original and newly arrived, mingled with the ease that would have been unimaginable under Elaine's reign. Michael helped Jason navigate the newly installed, smooth pathways that now connected every home to the community spaces. You're looking better, Michael observed, noting his brother's improved color and stay your hands. Amazing what happens when no one's tampering with your meds, Jason replied dryly. He nodded toward a tall man working the grill. That's Admiral Westbrook, submarine warfare. Lost both legs in a classified incident in the Arctic. Next to him is Dr. Fatima Rashid, former CDC bioweapons expert, partial paralysis after an accidental lab exposure.